Hello friends, my name is Barb and I work at Pine Quilt Shop in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. I have a project for you today that is an Easter egg wall hanging that you do a little bit different with a technique that marries a reverse applique along with ragtime. So I'll have a chance to show you how that all works once we get into the construction. But it's a project that goes fairly fast, so I know you're going to be able to get this done before Easter, and you'll have a nice little new wall hanging to put up for all your guests. This is a project that I saw in a magazine, either a craft magazine or a quilt magazine, probably 15 plus years ago. And I just decided to try making it with some fabric I had at home just to see what would happen with it. The project that they had put in the magazine was a Christmas ornament in the shape of a ball, and with their ball they had made designs across the middle of the ball so that it would have a design like many of the Christmas balls that we see. And I looked at that and I thought, well, that's cute, but I kind of liked the idea of trying an Easter egg instead. And so I found a shape of an Easter egg that I could use that would make the designs pop with how we end up cutting the different layers of fabric. So I found myself an Easter egg shape, which is just very, very simple. This project could also work with other shapes. Hearts would be really, really cute because again, you would have a very simple shape, but then you could make whatever designs through the middle, however you would want to cut these layers. So I'll show you how to do all that. If you're going to look for these kinds of designs, you can find them in children's coloring books that are very simple, and they will give you, shapes that you can use on this type of quilt. If you Google coloring pages on internet, you will find a plethora of different kinds of patterns. So there's all kinds of stuff out there that you can just take and copy and use their shapes. One thing I want to caution you on is don't try to use something that has more of a depth kind of issue, like a flower that has petals that go front and back and to the side, because you can't get that kind of detail on this kind of project. If you're going to do a flower, it would have to be something more flat, like a pansy, where you would have petals and then you can make your designs inside the petal. Rather than something that actually has to have more of a depth perception with how you layer the pieces. But for today, we're going to actually talk about Easter eggs because you can get lots of different shapes and colors. To do this, first off, what I did is I took this same shape and I put all of the, I drew my egg on just plain old typing paper and then made my designs in the middle of what I was going to use to cut. So if you look at my quilt that I made quite a long time ago, this particular block has the vertical stripes. So you just would make your shape so that you would have vertical stripes that you will cut between. So you can see this is the very middle. You're going to cut on the inside of it and on the outside of that line. That's going to give you this fringy area once you take and clip it and get it all fringed up. So this is what this design would look like in the quilt. This one has a little bit different shape. It has a bottom half and a top half with a dividing part in the middle. That will look similar to this one and kind of this one. So you've got this bottom here that you can see there are lines, and you've got the color peeking through those lines, as well as the polka dots. And with the polka dots, you actually, sew two different lines here and then cut them out so that you've got a background behind, and then the green would show on the top, and then you got the yellow. Some of them have pink. You can do whatever kind of conglomeration you want in there. The other one is the stripe, and this is what this one looks like. With cutting different colors, it will stripe up differently. And last but not least, this one kind of looks like this what I was getting at is you can make your lines wavy. You don't always have to have them be straight stripes. You can make them more pointed even if you want more of a jig-jaggedy kind of look. So, you know, these are basically the patterns that I used to make my 4 Easter eggs. When you go to make your pattern, you're going to take this and place just plain old tissue paper over the top of it. And you're going to draw with a pencil all of the lines that are onto your tissue paper. Use the cheapest stuff you can get because you want it to be able to tear away real easily. So I just get this stuff at the dollar store. And you can see through it well enough to see your pattern as well as being able to get it off after you sew it. One important part of this is that you do want to make sure that you know how to line this pattern up on your block. And to do that, you do need to put in a registration line. I wanted all of my eggs to tilt to the side. I didn't want them straight up and down. You may want them straight up and down, that's fine. But for me, I wanted them all to have the same angle. So when I did this, I found the middle of my egg and just took and folded my tissue paper over so I knew where the middle was, and put it on, and then I drew myself a line right there after I had measured, you know, matched up my pattern. I just drew a line right down the middle so that they would all be the same. I just put this one underneath the next one, matching up all of my shapes, and just followed that same line and put that same registration mark on each one of them. So always remember that step because you want to make sure that your eggs or your Christmas balls or your hearts or whatever all will have the same orientation on your block, and that will help you make sure that you get them in the right place. So that's the patterns. Now, supplies as far as what you need to cut these. Each one of these blocks is going to be 3 layers of fabric. So just like I have here, I have an orange and a green and a blue all layered together. I have cut these 9 by 11. You can make, you need 4 different colors. As you can see, I have blue, green, yellow, and red on this one. You will want to get a 1/4 yard of 4 different fabrics, and you can cut them so that you get 9 by 11 pieces. Most batiks you can get 44 inches out, and so you'll be able to get an 11-inch 4 times down a 1/4 yard of fabric. If it ends up that you can't quite get that and it's 10 3/4 or 10 1/2, no big deal. It's not going to change much as far as here. It'll just be a little bit smaller framing around, but that won't change anything if you need to, you know, cut them a little bit shorter. So you layer all 3 fabrics together. To be able to put your pattern on, you want to find where your middle is, and you're just going to take the whole works and flatten it all the way out so that you actually make yourself a fold line. You can see on this particular block there is just a fold right where I went right down the middle. And then I'm going to take my tissue paper pattern and I'm going to match up my registration mark right along that fold line so you can see where my registration mark is. This straight one right here I'm going to put right on my fold line. And then check the top and adjust it over just a little bit so that, again, that registration mark will be right down the middle. Now, to be sure that I've got it centered on the lengthwise, I usually just try to measure from the top of my egg where my mark is. And this is about 1 7/8 inches. And this one is about the same. So I've got it also centered on the lengthwise part as well. And then all you have to do is just pin your pattern right to the fabric, all 3 layers plus your tissue paper. Okay, and then you're ready to sew. And you may want to put a couple down the middle too, just because it may secure it a little bit more, but you don't usually need to pin very much. And then you're just going to sew on every single line, not your registration one, but all of these other lines that will make this design. And this is what it looks like when you have them sewn. The actual block is again 9 inches by 11. There are 3 fabrics that we layer, so there's a blue on this one and a pink and a gold. And I sewed on every single line. I would suggest that you make sure that you sew this outside one all by itself, and don't try to double up. If you can, pull those threads to the back and knot them. So you'll see on the back, wherever I had to end up, I would pull the threads to the back and knot them so that they wouldn't end up loosening up when we go to wash this. You want to make sure that they're secure, because you don't want to try to fix it after the fact. Once they're washed, it's a mess to try to find that stitch line. So stitch all the way around, and then you can double up on some of the ones in the middle, because once you start fringing them, you're not going to see all the stitching. The one on the outside, however, is often going to show. So that's why I tell you to be a little more cautious with that one. But the rest of these, you just take and sew all the way around, and when you've got them all sewn, then you're just going to take and tear the paper away. And you know, if you score it a little bit right along the stitch line with a fingernail or a stylus, it will even come apart a lot easier. You may have little flecks of tissue paper that some of it gets stuck inside the stitching. You can just take and pull it out, and then I take a lint roller and just get rid of all the trash that's still on the block. All right. The next step is to actually start cutting. And you remember what reverse applique is all about. It's taking one piece of fabric and making a cut in the center of it, whether it's a circle or whatever, and then tucking under like a 1/4 inch of fabric all the way around and stitching it so that the bottom fabric is going to show through this frame of fabric. That's what reverse applique is all about, not appliquing onto the top of a page, but actually to have the background be on top of what you're trying to show in the middle, and you sew that down. This is kind of the same kind of thing. It's a reverse applique in that we have other fabrics here that we want to cut away the top first or second layer so that it reveals other colors underneath, and so those will actually be your designs in your block, and this ends up looking like the background. To do that, you need to be able to separate these fabrics. Excuse me. And to do that, you actually have to get the fabric apart so that you can pull the back layer away so that you can feel that it's just one layer of fabric and that you still have 2 up here at the top. And you hold that, and you get your fancy dancy little scissors that has a nice sharp point, and you're just going to make yourself a little cut so that you can get inside. And then when you can tell, you can see that underneath, I just have the yellow peeking through, and I'm cutting through both the blue and the pink layer. Now you want to trim this so that you have about a 1/4 inch away from all of the stitching lines of this particular part. And I had started to do this on this side, but I'm going to take and finish it for you. You just cut down so that you have about a 1/4 inch all the way around above the stitching line, like so. And you can see that then the yellow peeks through from the bottom, and that's what you want to show, like you do in these over here, that you've got different colors that will show because of where you've cut. The yellow is the very bottom of this 3-part piece, and so you're going to cut the 2 top ones out so that your yellow shows through. When you want the blue to show through, you're only going to pick up 1. So in this particular egg, I want yellow and a blue in the middle. I'm going to leave the pink 2 little skinny lines so that I've got something that kind of divides my egg a little bit, and then I'm going to have blue and blue on the top and bottom. So to do this one, you actually have to do the same thing, but this time, since you want the blue to show, you've got to have 2 layers of your fabric that you'll pull to the back. and have only one here at the top that you're going to trim out. And once again, you take a little bit of a nip in that, and again, following your stitching line, you cut about 1/4 inch away. And you can see that I have the blue peeking through on this part. And so I'll cut all the way around 1/4 inch away, so that again there will be blue here. I'm going to leave the pink alone here so that I have something that divides it. I'm going to have a yellow, the blue, the yellow, a pink divider, and then a blue again at the bottom. Once you have all of these trimmed out, like these are, you're going to take and do something that we call ragtime. You remember ragtime quilts, where you end up taking and just doing all kinds of little cuts all the way along right up to the stitching line, so that when you go to wash this, these are all going to fluff up and get kind of fuzzy, so that it gives you more the look like this. Making those cuts, you're going to cut somewhere between 1/8 of an inch to 3/16 of an inch, and you want your point of your scissors to go all the way up to your stitch line. You don't want to cut through your stitch line, but you want to go all the way up to that stitching line. And these scissors, this is a Famori scissors, it's got a nice sharp point, works really well for this kind of project. I do kind of vary the sizes. I don't always make them real uniform. I think it's more organic looking if there's sometimes different sizes. I don't ever go over 1/4 inch, because then you get too big a glob of fabric. So they're usually between 1/8 and 3/16, and you just keep snipping. And that's the long part of this whole thing, because you have to snip all of those. As you can see, on every single egg, you're snipping everything right up to all your stitching lines. So once you get that all snipped, you're going to have a block that looks like this. Now this one is kind of a conglomeration of this egg and this egg, where I put the polka dots on the top. You stitch 2 lines so that it ends up giving you a little bit of a green border with the fringe coming up, and you have the pink below it as the background and the polka dot. I left a green divider line in the middle so that there's something that divides the top half from the bottom. And the bottom, I just have the blue peeking through with those green edges. So this one matches up with what this looks like. All of those green fringy things that I've cut there are going to look like this. And the polka dots are going to look like these. Okay, so you're going to make all 4 of these. Find a good program to watch or a podcast or whatever, and sit down and start snipping, because that's going to take the longest time to do all 4 of these, because you have to cut all of them and snip them all. But once you've got them all done, you need to put them together. And so we're going to pretend that this one's done. When you put these together, to sew them together, you don't want to sew all 6 layers of fabric, because you're going to end up with a great big seam in the middle, and that's going to be obvious and it's going to look stupid. So to do this, I only sew the top fabric of each block together to sew them together. So to make that a little bit easier on myself, I just take those 2 bottom layers and I pin them away out of my way so that I don't catch them in my seam. Same thing with this one. I'm going to take the 2 bottom ones, pin them to the back so that I keep them out of my way. And then I'm going to match up just those 2 top layers and sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way down. When you get that done, you're going to have a seam that you can open up. So you're going to have these 2 together, and you're just going to open them up. And then with all of the excess fabric that you have from these other 2 blocks, you're just going to layer them over the top of each other. So like that and like that. And if you remember back to home ec, at least my home ec, when we had to sew dresses and put facings in, we had to grade our seams. You can grade these. You can cut some of these a little bit thinner and bigger so that they distribute the weight of that fabric along that seam line. And then I usually just, once I get them all to where I want them to be, I usually just whip stitch a little bit in the seam allowance right here so that it holds them in that corner, so I know that they're not going to flip up when I go to put the next one together. So you're going to put these two together, you're going to have two more here, and then you're going to seam across here. But always remember, it's always just going to be with the top fabric of each one of those blocks. All right, so once you get that together, that's going to look like this. Now, to finish it, you're going to want to put something in it that will stabilize it a little bit better. So what I usually use is a fusible fleece that you can just cut to the size that will, and then fuse the top directly to that fleece so that it holds everything in place. So you want to make sure that this is nice and flat, nice and straight, and then you're gonna cut your fleece just a little bit smaller, probably a good 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more, smaller than your quilt top, so that you don't have it peeking through on your edges when you want to go to fringe them. Fusible fleece comes in many ways. We have it by the bolt, and it's just got one-sided sticky stuff that will fuse right to your top. The bottom does not fuse. And once you get that nice and fused, then you're going to put your back on. The back is going to be a couple layers of fabric. I used the blue that you can see here on the back, as well as another fat quarter of another batik that I had that had green and blue and pink and yellow and different things in it, and just put that in between, and it just gave it a little more depth, just to give it a little bit more color. You don't have to do that. You could make both of the pieces on the back the same. That works. I'll show you that on one of the ones I did. But it just gives it a little bit more depth. And you do want to make it just a little bit bigger than your quilt top, because you'd like to have a little more fringe on the outside edge. So this one is cut so that it's a 1/2 inch bigger all the way around what your quilt top measures. Now with my 9 by 11 blocks, my quilt top came out at 17.5 by 21.5. So I cut my two backing pieces 18 by 22 so that it would give me that extra 1/4 inch all the way around the edge to give that a little more fluff. And then once you've got that all pinned on, you're just going to have to stabilize that fusible fleece so that it doesn't end up bunching up when you go to wash it. So to do that, you're just going to edge around each one of your eggs about a 1/4 inch away from the original stitching so that it actually holds this all together, your quilt sandwich all together, with stitching through all layers. And once you've got all the eggs done, then you're going to go all the way around the outside edge, and I did 2 rows of stitching around the outside, just again to hold it in place. If you don't do that and you wash it, the fleece can kind of pull up in between and can bunch. So you want to make sure that you catch all of that. Ask me how I know. I made that mistake. So once you get this all stitched, you're going to throw it in the washer, and it's going to come out after just a short, delicate cycle. You're going to end up with all these pieces being all frayed and fringy, you know, in the middle of the eggs as well as the edge, and you're done. So it's a project you can get done before Easter. It's going to take you probably half day to a good part of the day, depending on how fast and how much your hand can handle all the clipping, but it's going to come out and be done and be something that you can put up. I've had this one, I know, for quite a long time. I still take it out at Easter time because I like it so much, and I end up putting it up in my entryway or on my door or over my dinner table. So this is a project I think that will be fun for you to try. Now, this is also to show you some things not to do. So let me show you some of the flubs I made. One of the things that I think is important to note is that the fabric that you layer, you want your top layer to be a darker fabric. Like you can see on this one, there's a dark blue and a darker green. And then the red and the yellow seem to pop against those darker colors. I thought I was going to make this one with variations of light and darks, but this light pink for me just does not seem to give this egg any definition. It just seems like it's kind of blah. And so just for your own sake, always be looking for something a little bit on the darker medium side for your top layer so that you've got something to pop against. The other thing I did on this one is I wanted to see what would happen if I stitched, if I'm going to stitch outside of my egg, if I cut those in between and tried to fringe them, how that would look. I don't like that look either. I don't think that adds anything to the egg. I think it takes away. So probably best to just do one single stitch all the way around and not try to fringe it. So that's one. The other one is I was trying to figure out if I could do something that would be 3D. So this one I made this weekend. And I thought I was really going to do, you know, a real cool thing, and I was going to put batting behind just the eggs. So I took this nice fat fluffy polyester batting, and I took my egg shape and I cut out batting, and then I put it on the back side of each one of these eggs and just kind of gave it a little 505 to hold it in place so that I could put this all down. Well, when I went to wash it, guess what? I hadn't secured this in place, and so what happened is all the batting ended up in a big ball in the middle. And so I have to take this one apart and redo it. The other thing I didn't like about this is I didn't realize that without that fusible fleece behind everything, this gets kind of wrinkly and kind of messy looking. So when I go to take this apart, number one, I'm going to cut my egg shape bigger. I made myself another egg that is just a little bit bigger than my original one to cut my batting, so that when I do put this down, I'm going to use fusible. When I do put this down, it's going to be the size of where I'm going to be stitching around my egg, and I will catch all the edges of this fusible piece so that it actually will be stabilized in the quilt and not allow it to bunch up in the wash. And once I get those all in, then I'm just going to put one whole layer of fusible over the whole thing. So there will only be 2 layers behind each one of the eggs, but not this big fluffy polyester one like I used. I'm just going to, it'll have a little more definition, but not this much of a 3D effect. And I thought that was probably a better idea. The other thing that I want to make sure that you realize is that you don't want to snip through your stitching when you're making this. I didn't realize when I was making all my little clips that I had clipped my outside stitching. And this is going to be a problem because sooner or later this is going to work its way in and keep tearing in. So I'm going to need, when I plan to take this apart and redo it anyway, I'm going to take all of that out and then redo the whole stitching line so that it's nice and solid, and there's no way that it can pull apart and start to rip in from those clips. So some of the flubs I made, but at least I learned from them, and I hope that will help you as well. So you can see that I like batiks. I've made, you know, both of these out of batik material because I like the strength of the color, because it's dyed and it's actually colored both front and back. If you want to do it with cotton, it certainly works. It's just that with cotton, most of those are printed, and so you're going to have more white show when you make all the clips. And let me show you what that looks like. This is one that's made just with cotton. And you can see it ends up fraying a lot more, and it looks more white, you know, in that frayed area. And that's just because of the way the cottons are printed. This is pretty. This makes a really nice, almost like a chenille kind of look, you know, where you've made all the clips. And that's pretty too. Maybe something more like a baby quilt would work well with something like this. or maybe you just like it softer than what my more vivid colors are with the batiks. But that's a design choice on your part. So anyway, project for today is an Easter egg wall hanging that you can get done well before Easter. It's kind of a fun little project. It marries a couple different techniques together, like we talked about, reverse applique plus ragtime, the ragtime all the clipping, so that you end up with a real nice fuzzy look wherever you have stitched, and it gives it more definition when you're cutting through different layers so that you bring different colors to the forefront. Remember to make the background piece the darker one so that your eggs will pop against that. And that's about all I have for you today. So happy Easter, and thank you for watching.